Hello, everybody. It is Corey Poirier, and I'm really excited to be back today with our special guest, Jade Simmons. And we're going to talk all things speaking, but we're also going to learn a little bit about Jade's journey as well. So I think probably the best starting point, Jade, will be to bring you right on and ask you to, first of all, tell us a little bit about your backstory and maybe we'll lead up to how you get into the world of speaking. But what's your sort of backstory that maybe helped that become possible?
Okay, well, we would need an entire another half hour probably to cover the backstory, but I'll give you kind of the nuts and bolts. I have always made my career primarily as a classical concert pianist. And I'll tell you that I got out of grad school and right away realized that it was not going to be as easy as everyone said. They said practice makes perfect, that cream rises to the top, all those wonderful sayings. And there's truth in those things, but I'll tell you what, my industry is a very competitive one, and you have to do more than just play well. So we talked a little bit off camera about branding. I started studying everything other than classical music. I was curious about how commercial brands got the word out, how they found their audiences. I was obsessed with things like Michael Jordan, Nike, and Apple. Those are some of my early business models. And so in the beginning, one of the things that I did right away was I started speaking from the stage in between the music. And this made an incredible connection with the audience. Apparently in the world of classical music, they expected musicians to play, but not to actually talk. So this was a big deal. Eventually I started blending, even daring to blend musical styles on stage. So today my concerts go from Rachmaninoff all the way to rap. But I do make a large part of my career as well as a professional speaker. And that really started from those moments where I dared to speak to my audience. And I realized this was an incredible opportunity for impact beyond the piano. So that kind of brings us up to date to where we are today in terms of my music career. And as you know, as we partner together in the release of your latest book, I'm also an author.
Absolutely. And so it's funny, I'm just looking off to the side here because you mentioned studying branding, and I have three books on my desk right now that I've been kind of going back to refresh myself just when I'm making branding decisions. But one is called Fame 101. I don't know if you've heard of that or not before. The second one is called Pop by Sam Horn. And the third one, I would say one of the most powerful books I've ever read in branding is called Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout.
Really?
So, yeah, so 3 books on the branding or media side that I couldn't recommend more.
That's exciting. Positioning is one of my favorite words these days. A lot of my speaking is happening in the faith-based world. I'm a Christian, and over the last year or so, my faith was just something that was for me, and my speaking has evolved into allowing the way that I explore my faith and study my faith to be something that I share. And positioning, I'm finding, is key in every realm of living, that if we don't get in position for the things that we're dreaming about and hoping for, they're not going to happen. So I love hearing that word.
Awesome stuff. Well, I definitely say you should recommend read the book and reach out if you love things like Nike, and they dissect basically the brands like Harley and Nike and how did they get their brand positioning and how did they keep it. And they even go into like little stories like how Heinz used to be Heinz pickles, that's what they dominated. And they talked about how you can't be the leader or typically with 2 brand names. So what happened was when they shifted to ketchup, they lost to Hunt's in the pickle side. So they just basically traded one for the other, essentially.
Oh, I love hearing those types of stories.
So anyway, yeah, I highly recommend that book. I think I might even have multiple copies. Let me check that. If I do, we'll make it happen so you can get one.
Okay, thank you.
So off that side of things, on to, I guess, let's talk about branding for a couple of minutes in relation to speaking. And then I maybe want to dive into your experience in the speaking world and what that journey's looked like since you got into that side of things. But on the brand side of things, I mentioned that offline, that when I go to your website, it just kind of goes pow, and your images go, it's just vibrant is the best word I can come up with for it. It's something that just grabs your attention. So you mentioned you studied branding. Was that intentional from a positioning point of view for people to just kind of go, who is this person, and just be pulled right in?
I'll tell you what has been crucial. I understood very early on that the brand couldn't be something that you created, couldn't be something you pulled out of a hat. It had to really emanate from the essence of who you were. And so one thing that I was realizing is that I had become multiple versions of myself. There was a classical music Jade, there was an at-home Jade, there was a church Jade, and I thought, I don't like being multiple versions of myself. What would happen if I took all those parts of myself and dared to present them every time, all the time, on every stage? That's where everything changed. So the vibrancy that you're talking about really is the culmination of me allowing myself to be who I've always been, but saying, gosh darn it, I don't have to pretend or only show half of myself because I think an audience only wants to see that part of myself. So the fears were very real, that if I told stories and dared to crack jokes in a classical music setting, would they get me? And not everybody's gonna get you. And I think when you let go of that fear, you tap into your real audience. So the branding was a natural evolution. And then what I always tell people that I'm helping with branding or helping with expanding their platform is when you listen to what audiences say they're getting from you, don't ignore that. Take note of that and then recycle that experience on purpose. That's where your brand lies.
Wow. And you know, what you made me think of right away when you said sort of being the authentic who you are in every aspect of your life is, and it goes back to that book Positioning. We interviewed a guy a number of years ago, and he runs a preserve, lack of a better word, a jam, so a preserve store. And what he decided to do is he went to his heritage and realized he was Scottish. And he always kind of felt an affinity to that culture, and he didn't know why. He went and did his genealogy, found that out, and so he started wearing a kilt every day to work and everywhere he went. And it's so funny because he got more media and more attention for actually being his authentic self. And what's really neat, and until you said it, I didn't really think about it in that context, is I did this talk one time for a youth group, and the challenge they were running into is that at the company, the organization was having a challenge with saying to the youth group, you know, you can't, let's say, dress like that, you can't do this because of what we're trying to present, let's say. I mean, it was more of a corporate philosophy that they felt that way, but they're like, how can you get that message to them? And I think because I'm still young at heart, I kind of went in with a different approach than they probably expected. And I shared the story of how I was younger and I was listening to heavy metal and like Metallica and things like that. And what I said to them, and I think this was the tagline that stuck with them because they, on my evaluation forms, they kept commenting, is I said, there's no reason that because you change your outer image just for your work day, that you can't still be Metallica inside and radiate that on the outside. And so what happened with me is when I was younger, to kind of get anywhere, I had to cut my hair because I had long hair. I was into metal music. But what's really interesting to me is that when I shaved my head a couple of years ago, it wasn't because I had to, it wasn't because the spots were coming or anything. I ultimately had wanted to do that forever because that was kind of, that felt real to me. And even my little goatee, which is kind of thin right now, that felt real. But in other walks of life, I felt I couldn't express that. But when I got into the speaking industry, I felt it was sort of embraced, and it became what makes me different. But it also spoke to that guy who probably listened to Metallica back in the day, who might not listen to them anymore, but it's still the authentic me. So I just love what you said, because I never realized that I maybe unconsciously have been doing that.
You know, I'm starting to believe that from the moment we're born, because our instinct is to go away from the womb, right? We're born and then we go out into the world. Well, in that process, the world starts to put its own impressions on you and what they think you should be. Your well-meaning parents tell you what they think you should be and how they think you should be. And as we go through life, if we're not careful, we forget who we originally were. There's this wonderful scripture in the Bible that says that God knew us before we were even in the womb, and that he consecrated us before we were even born. So I'm thinking, so he must know something about me that's so awesome that I haven't yet figured out. So I think oppositely, instead of running outwards away from our birthplace, we should be running back. So that's why the guy with the jam felt this connection to his Scottish heritage. That's why I understanding as an African-American female classical pianist, that made me a little bit alien in my industry, and I shouldn't try to conform to look more like the rest of my industry. So when we talk about speaking, you know, it's ironic. I said everybody's not going to get you. I'm brought in more to speak, Corey, to corporate settings, women's conferences, tech conferences than I ever am to arts conferences. Isn't that amazing? My early speaking career was literally, I was making, well, I should be honest, I was Miss Chicago, Miss Illinois, and then first round Miss America. And I spoke, my platform was youth suicide prevention. So I traveled the nation for a few years speaking on suicide prevention. That was my first taste of really speaking for impact. But then my music career really took off after that. So when the professional speaking career really kicked up, I was speaking a lot about creativity and innovation, things that I knew. Well, I was also speaking to artists about the process of discovering themselves, because we had been kind of silently taught to wait around and get discovered, that some big name conductor was going to find us, some manager was going to sign us, some record label, and then everything would be set. We just practice all day and our career would be made for us. And that happens to maybe 1% of those. And so what I realized very early on was that so much of my discovery was going to have to be my discovery. I was going to have to do the digging and find out what made me who I was. And so it's funny that the more that I became my original self, I call it, not my new self, I didn't have to reinvent. The more that I became my original self, the parts of the world that really needed what I had to offer found me. So in the beginning, when I was reaching out mostly to artists, I used to make these YouTube videos called Emerge Already, and they were designed to teach artists how to not be starving artists and how to build their career, how to brand. And I had a pretty loyal following, but for the most part, if I'm being honest, many of them didn't want to have to do things different. They really wanted to believe that if they just practiced, it would work out. And so I think as a speaker, you have to know there's an audience for you. It's not always the audience that you think. And you need to be catering to the audience who already knows they need you.
So what's so cool about that is one of the common themes that's been coming up in these interviews is authenticity and the importance of authenticity. And I don't think now that I've heard so many people talk about it in their own way, that it's a surprise. You know, and most of the people that I'm talking to have traveled the journey and got to the point where they feel now they're in their comfort zone. So it's interesting how most of those people that have reached that comfort zone have gone back to this idea that it's about being authentic with your audience, with yourself, with everybody that hires you. So I love that you're echoing that as well, Jade.
I'll tell you what, in the speaker industry, which you know, incredibly competitive. I don't know what's wrong with me. I keep picking these overly competitive fields, right? They're oversaturated. Everybody, their grandmother, great-grandma is a professional speaker these days, right? And one of the things that I'm noticing is helping to stand out is something I never thought would be a factor, because it shouldn't be. One of the things that's helping me to stand out in the speaking world is the fact that I come in incredibly prepared. Incredibly prepared. Now, maybe that comes from being a classical musician and having to spend hours on one passage that's going to fly by in 2 seconds in an actual concert. But it was second nature to me to learn about the company that I was going to speak to. I have heard, I'm sure you've heard some of these horror stories about some big name people who will remain nameless, who have come into these organizations, have not known who they were speaking to, gave their canned speech, and they were impressive enough, but did they really leave a remnant on the hearts and minds of the people in the audience? No. And they have taken for granted this incredible responsibility and gift to be able to open your mouth and have people pay you to hear what you have to say, and more importantly, have it be so that the words you say might actually change their lives. I think many speakers have taken that for granted. So already you're going to set yourself up ahead of the game if you determine to prepare like a beast, meaning that you learn about your audience. It's only respectful to know who are in the seats that are in front of you.
Well, and I'm glad you say that, because I've had for a number of years, I didn't start this way because, you know, the first 2 years I didn't get that either, but I started putting together a survey. And the interesting part is I found these kind of key questions that work, at least for me, with the clients I work with. So just 6 questions about the industry, you know, what's going on now? What are you facing internally as an organization? It's changed everything for me. And it's allowed me to personalize my talk and get more from the talk and allow them to, like you said, maybe have a transformation, or maybe hear something that they say, this guy must have worked in our industry or something. So they
Yeah,
listen closer and things change. But what's interesting about what you just said too, Jade, is I have heard the horror stories. And I had a client one time tell me they brought this speaker in from across the country, and they paid him, I think it was 10,000 roughly US. And they brought him in, and he was driving with them from the airport. And so he said, what's the name of this city again? And so they told him it was in Little Prince Edward Island in Canada. And so it's in a place called Charlottetown. And so they said, it's called Charlottetown. He goes, oh, this is a nice little city. He goes, I might have to take my wife here sometime. So then they watched him about 10 minutes, well, say an hour or two later when he got on the stage, walk onto the stage and say, it's so great to be back in Charlottetown yet again.
no way.
Asked them what the name of the city was, and then he delivered, like you said, his canned speech for an hour, and then walked off the stage. But from the buyer's point of view, maybe not the audience, we paid this guy this much money,
Right.
and he's so inauthentic that he actually told us that he told us that he's basically going to lie to the audience by asking us where he's at.
He lied.
Yeah.
You can start from a place of lying. Even if your audience doesn't know any better, I do believe that, like you talked about, things that radiate from you, people know when you're genuine. And I'll say something that sounds like a contradiction. You must prepare like crazy. You must get to know the organization, get to know the audience. Sometimes, Corey, I'll even go in a little early, have dinner with the presenters. And once we're comfortable, I'll say, okay, I know what you told me you want me to talk about. I know what you said they're expecting to hear, but tell me, what are they really dealing with? What's the behind the scenes issues that are keeping them up at night? I know you want me to talk about record breaking and, you know, all these things, but what are they really dealing with? And it's in those moments that I get these kernels of truth that completely revolutionize the experience in front of the audience. So I do say prepare. Now, one of the prayers I always pray is, God, take away all my notes, all my bullet points, make my PowerPoint not work if that's not what you want me to say. And in the moment, give me the words that I am to speak. I'll tell you that prayer has never led me astray. Most times I will not get through all of my slides. Most times I will not give exactly the speech that I intended. Every time I give the presentation I was designed to give at that moment in time.